Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name's Katie, and I'm going to be introducing our presenter today, Jonathan Knoth. And just some quick housekeeping rules. If anyone has any questions or comments for us, just use the question box down at the bottom and we'll be able to respond to you. And I think that's the only big housekeeping rule, and I'm going to pass it over to Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it. I know that on the line, we have a lot of current Shibumi customers, some of whom I have the pleasure of working with. So thank you for joining. Thank you all for joining. And some folks who just want to really understand some best practices for driving successful transformation programs. So we look forward to covering those topics today. By way of introduction, my name is Jonathan Knoth. At Shibumi, I lead our value delivery function. So my team, myself, we have the pleasure of working with customers to help co-creating what their transformation journey looks like, understanding the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, how they organize internally today to achieve those outcomes, and doing some gap analysis, understanding where we want to come from, where do we want to go to, and then really kind of creating that long-term value journey. Transformations don't happen overnight. So what are some of the quick wins that we can get right out of the gate? What are some of those bigger wins that might take a little bit longer? And then what are those true transformation wins? So that's where my team really focuses. I look forward to this today. Please fire questions through the chat. Katie will stop me as those questions come through and ask them. And we look forward to a really great conversation. So what are we going to cover today? A couple of things that I already mentioned. We're going to start with some kind of best practices around establishing the transformation discipline. Like, what does that even mean? How does it look across our customers? And why does that make it successful? Then we'll talk through, defining business outcomes. We'll talk through how we want to structure the value journey. That's where we're going to dig into those quick wins, those big wins, and those transformational wins. What do they typically look like? How do we go about achieving those? Get a little bit more tactical on some of the things that we see are common gaps across customers that are going through transformations. Talk through what a launch plan might look like. And then we'll get into a little bit of a case study around how we help customers deepen their transformation discipline. So that's what we'll cover today. And we'll do that through the lens of kind of this situation where we have this global technology company. They've been in business for 25 years. They're constantly transforming. Transforming isn't just this finite activity. They always want to get better. They always want to drive growth. They always want to make sure that they're, running their business profitably and that they're, keeping their people and their customers happy. We'll talk through it through the lens of Acme Corp. So when we talk about really establishing the discipline, what do we really mean? What is a transformation discipline? And at Shibumi, we've been fortunate to work with customers of all different sizes, massive Fortune 10 companies down to rapidly growing startups in a wide variety of industries, whether it's oil and gas, insurance, grocer, and everything in between. There is some commonalities that we see on what makes transformations really successful. And that's what we mean by deepening the discipline. It's what we call this cycle slide here, where, every transformation, we're doing these transformations to drive some type of outcome, some type of value, something that as an organization, our leadership team can point to saying, hey, we're moving XYZ needle because our investors care about it, or the board cares about it, or our customers care about it. So all transformations that are successful typically start with clarity around what are the outcomes that we're actually driving. And then once we have those outcomes and they're crystal clear, we need to generate ideas in order to achieve those outcomes. And once we have those ideas, with hopefully a big enough pipeline of ideas to cover the targets for those outcomes, we need to figure out, how are we going to objectively evaluate these ideas? That often takes place through the mechanism of a business case, where we look at financials and non-financials. So we want to make sure that we have some commonality across the organization and how we're defining business cases. And once we have those business cases, we can stack rank and prioritize to make effective, confident go or no go decisions on those particular ideas, on those particular initiatives. And once we launch those ideas and initiatives, we need to make sure that we're managing and monitoring that execution. And then, of course, throughout the life cycle of those initiatives, those strategic priorities, we want to make sure that we're tracking benefit realization. So when we talk about establishing a discipline, this is what we're talking about here. And across customers are, more mature or less mature in different areas of these cycles. And when we really try to enhance our transformations, we can lean into all these different areas to help with some of those quick wins, those big wins, and those transformational wins. So wanted to start with this foundation because it's super common across all of our customers. So let's talk now a little bit about what do we mean by defining outcomes? What are some of the most common outcomes that these transformations are driving? And really, there's these critical levers that we're trying to pull in order to achieve a broader vision. So for Acme Corp, their vision is, our customers are always delighted by how we help them build sustainable businesses. So that's what this software organization is trying to do. In order for them to do that, they need to be a viable business, a strong business, and they have common focus areas, right? We can bucket those outcome areas into financial performance, where we're talking about profit, or we're talking about cash flow, or we're talking about EBITDA, or if we want to get a little bit more tactical, maybe we're valuing our initiatives on net present value. So oftentimes there's, 4, 5, 10 large financial performance indicators that are outcomes that are absolutely critical for our success, and the transformation should be aligned behind those particular outcomes. And then we can look at operational performance. Maybe we're talking about process cycle time. We want to improve that. Or we're talking about productivity rate or time to market for our products. These are often areas that transformations are driving as well. And then the last one is risk and compliance. So we can talk about, ESG performance score or our compliance rate, different things that, are kind of critical for our business that often might fall in the run the business particularly rather than maybe grow the business. One thing that I would note here too is these are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Financial performance might be lagging indicators for innovation rate or time to market, right? If we're trying to bring products to market faster, that likely is going to result in increasing revenue, which will then have hopefully a positive benefit on profitability. But these are typical kind of areas that successful transformations are really anchored to. So if we want to look deeper at, Acme Corp, what might they be focused on? In this case here, they're focused really on 4 different areas. They're focused on reducing complexity while increasing efficiencies across product and tech orgs, which is going to result in $250 million in cost savings. They want to expand and grow in emerging markets, specifically Brazil, Russia, India, and China, while maintaining 31% of margins. They want to accelerate and bring products to market faster. And then they have a culture objective where they want to grow leadership skills inside the organization, which will serve as a great foundation for them going forward. So that's what this organization is focused on at the top level of the organization. These are where these outcomes sit. And they have a way in which they organize to achieve those objectives, which is that discipline that we talked about on the right side of the screen here. This is pretty common across our customers where customers have 4 or 5 thematic objectives, so often around growth, profitability, innovation, operational excellence, and then something around culture. So what does this actually look like inside Acme Corp or really inside of any organization? We call this kind of trickle-down strategy, where those 5 objectives or outcomes that I talked about, they might sit at the top of the house here, the top of the organization. And then there's different programs or strategic initiatives, milestones, tasks as you get deeper in the organization that are hopefully aligned behind those particular outcomes. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the entire horsepower of the organization is mobilized behind what matters most. And theoretically, what matters most are, those outcomes that we just talked about here. So in the example of that profitability outcome that we talked about, Acme Corp might have different types of programs that are driving profitability. It might be supply chain optimization. It might be digital transformation. It might be 4 or 5 or 6 more. We just ran out of space on a page. But there's all these programs that are driving this profitability. They have initiatives that are rolling up to it that are all supported by these different milestones that all have tasks underneath it. So when we think about kind of laying out the transformation on a page, so to speak, this is what we might be looking at. And it's in support of those broader outcomes. So I want to pause here and throw out a poll question to the group where we're going to ask, if you think about the current portfolio of initiatives or projects at your organization right now, do you have clarity on how that project rolls up to the broader strategy of the company? And that's widely transparent. So there's traceability between, hey, these are the outcomes. It's super, super clear on what those outcomes actually are. And I know how, the projects that I touch or that I influence are actually driving that strategy. Or we have an idea of how that project influences strategy. It's kind of like a little bit of a gut check, like, hey, this is obvious, but it's not, there's not some traceability. There's not some roll up to it. Or, a lot of organizations, they don't have clarity. There's a big gap between strategy and execution. So that's what we're talking about in this poll question. We'll give, a minute or so to collect the results.
And if you can't see the poll, just scroll down a little bit below our video. So that's where the questions will be. We have a few coming in right now. So right now it looks like about 80% of the responses are 80% have an idea of how the project influences strategy achievement, but it's sometimes fuzzy.
All right. Yeah. So that is probably the most common that we see in customers when they start with us. It's a little bit gut check. We have, an inkling of an idea of how this is influencing, but it's not clearly defined. So the next step there would be, if we're moving from that quick win to a bigger one would be, hey, we want to make sure that we have traceability. So we understand that the net benefits that we're reaping actually are aligned to that strategy. And we'll talk a little bit about how that can happen. So thank you for that, Katie. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Acme Corp and across their always transforming organization. How are they bucketing quick wins? How are they bucketing big wins? How are they bucketing transformational wins? What makes sense for them? And, across the customers that I'm fortunate enough to work with, this looks radically different for each customer. Some customers have a really, really strong transformation motion that is cross-functional in nature, and they really just want to digitize that. And some don't. Some are just kind of starting to really build that, enterprise PMO or strategy management office or strategy execution office, and they want to, really start building that from the ground floor up. I would say that Acme is, somewhere in the middle here, where on their transformation journey, what they're trying to do is kind of what we just talked about in that poll. They want to have transparency into misaligned priorities and trade-offs, and that they want clarity on business value drivers. Prioritizing our efforts is an objective. They want it to be objective rather than subjective. So essentially for Acme Corp, what they're saying is, hey, we have all these different initiatives and we think that they're driving the strategy, but it's not really clear on how we would prioritize these initiatives. Maybe our financials aren't clear, or maybe it's not clear what critical KPIs we should be aligned behind and influencing. So we have a great number of initiatives. We have a great number of products, but we want help with stack ranking that. What would be a even bigger win for them, might take a little bit longer, is they want data-informed decision-making to no longer be a pipe dream. They want it to be a reality. So what does that mean? We really need to have a single source of truth across all of our different programs, across all of our different portfolios, so we can be proactive rather than reactive. And then what's a transformational win? Transformational wins, they definitely will take longer in nature because they're, big, hairy, audacious goals. But they want to actually move from data-informed decision-making to data-driven decision-making. So it's like a little bit of a difference between looking back and then looking forward. And how will they do that? Well, the data needs to be robust in order to do that, so they can scenario plan, forecast, and predict. So a lot of the groundwork that Acme Corp is going to be laying in their quick wins and big wins will help them get to those transformational wins. Right? If we want a scenario plan, we probably need to have a really strong muscle on resource management or resource allocation. So those are some of the things that we might be focused on in that big win area. So again, to put a bow on this, all customers are different. We like to help in kind of sussing out where are you at right now, and what would be, a quick win is not a small win, right? Like what would be important to really yield in the first quarter or in the first 2 quarters or across one program, right? And then we move down from there to the big wins and then to the transformational wins. And this changes over time, right? Like the business is changing fast. It's changing quickly. Think about COVID, right? Things were changing really fast. Prior to COVID, every organization, was grow at all costs. Rates were low. And then when COVID hit, there's a ton of uncertainty. It was more like, let's protect the house. Let's double down on the base. And then, there was a change after that as well. So these priorities change and shift. This serves as a really good North Star on what we're focusing on. So now that we've laid out that journey, we're going to get a little bit more tactical. What are some of the common gaps that we see across organizations as it relates to transformations? And these next 3 slides, they look really similar. They're just they're probably the 12 most common areas where we see transformations fall flat. And that could be people related, it could be process related, or it could be technology related. So in any of those 3 areas, these are the 12 most common areas where we see transformations fall flat. I won't really drain these slides, but I'll talk to them at a high level. So the first is around that strategy to execution gap. Do we have misaligned priorities? Do we have that traceability? That's really, important. The next is around idea intake. How do we source ideas from the organization? Do we want to source it broad across literally every single employee at a 50,000 person company? Do we want to focus on, just our key focus areas if it's, tech and product like it is for Acme Corp, right? So how do we have a really good line of sight into the pipeline of our ideas? Acme Corp, like we mentioned earlier, is really focused on that business case management, getting to a spot where they're objective rather than subjective. Governance, how do we stage gate things? How do we make sure that we have the right approvals? Roadmaps, this is where strategy meets execution. So it's that execution layer. How do we make sure that we're staying on track? Where do we have dependencies? Where are the critical milestones? What is included in that critical path? Do we have line of sight into that? Resource management. So again, if we're trying to figure out net benefits for ROI and we want to figure out how we're going to optimize particular initiatives, we need to understand what resources are going to be driving those initiatives. So we have the cost laid out. How do we do that resource management? That could be a gap. RAID log, so poor management of risks, issues, and dependencies. We want to have clarity into all those so everyone's playing with the cards face up. Benefit realization. How do we actually track the benefits over time? How do we make sure that, what we predicted early on in the process is actually coming to fruition? Reporting is always a big one. Trying to strive for that single source of truth in a cross-functional organization is often difficult. How do we, connect into the right things? How do we surface the right information so we're making decisions efficiently? We can be proactive rather than reactive. And then the holy grail is scenario planning, right? Once we have that entire foundation built, how do we then drive predictability? How do we prioritize based on, past results and things that are going on macroeconomically? How do we do that type of scenario planning? So that's often the biggest transformational win that we're building towards. So typically what we do with our customers is, we try to understand these things deeply, co-create that value journey, and then zero in on where are we going to start? What levers are we going to pull? So the right side of these columns here, by the way, are the modules inside of Shibumi that help take care of these kind of common areas. We've built these modules in working with our customers for 10 plus years because these are the most common things that we see. So we want to make sure that we have, out of the box solutions that help, reduce these negative consequences of trying to execute a successful transformation. Once we align on those areas that we're going to be zeroing in on. So those, 12 areas, customers might say, hey, we want to focus on 3, or we want to focus on 5, or we want to focus on 1. That's going to bring us to our quick wins. We put together a sample technology-driven delivery timeline on what that rollout looks like. So as long as we stay close to those base modules, this is, a typical implementation might be 10 weeks, might be 12 weeks, right? It depends on kind of the nuances there. But we work with organizations to kind of put this together. This is just for the technology portion of like the people process technology. Melody, so plug to Melody on my team. She's going to be doing a webinar that follows this in about a month. And that's going to cover change management, which will really talk to the people and process point, not just the technology point. All right. So before we get into like a click down for Acme Corp in a way that they might build on success for their business case and prioritization, what we want to talk a little bit about is what are just some high level principles for a successful transformation. And we've kind of organized this into like what to be excited about and what to strive for, and then what to kind of look out for. So first is leadership buy-in. If we're doing a transformation, we should be connecting that transformation to high level outcomes that leaders should care about. So theoretically, we should always have leadership buy-in. Strategy follows gravity. Strategy starts at the top of the organization. So we want that leader to be a change champion for the transformation. When that happens, a lot of doors can be unlocked pretty quickly. So that's super important, and it's a success mode for all transformations. Next is personas. Again, I talked earlier about how we want to make sure that we have the entire horsepower of the organization mobilized behind what matters most. That means that there's different personas at all different levels of the organization, top to bottom, and horizontally as well. We want to make sure that all of the personas that are involved in this transformation have what they need to be successful. And that might be, the strategy management layer, if we're sitting at the top of the organization, or if we're lower in the organization where we're kind of individual contributors and we're doing the work, we want to make sure that, we have the tools in our toolkit to make ourselves successful, whether that's technology, whether that's process. That strategy execution stack really needs to be looked at through a persona lens. And the last is people, process, and technology needs to be in lockstep. So that means that, our process, how are we evaluating business cases? That needs to be supported by our technology, right? Our people need to go through the right change management steps. It could be light, it might be heavier depending on the different transformation, but we need those like 3 legs of the stool, people, process, and technology, to be in lockstep. And what are some challenge modes? First is unrealistic expectations, right? That's like the grim reaper for all transformations. Transformations are really hard, especially when you're talking about cross-functional, holistic business transformations. There's a plethora of advisory firms that do studies on this. Broadly, 70% of transformations fail. So expecting them to happen overnight is a dangerous exercise. It's why we think at Shibumi that the framework of quick wins, big wins, and transformational wins is so important. And celebrating those quick wins when we get them is critical, because that helps build that momentum onto the bigger areas of that transformation. Talked a little bit about change management. Neglecting it could be a problem. We want to make sure that everyone is in the boat with us, rowing in the same direction. So establishing that what's in it for me for each of those personas and using change management as a lever to drive that progress is important. And then consistent changes to technology. I think everyone kind of understands that, and no one wants to be in 500 different systems or hunting and pecking in, 70 tabs in an Excel workbook, right? Like that is not an efficient way to gain buy-in. So, having a technology, sticking with it, having that be the foundation that underpins the people in the process can be really helpful in your transformation journey. All right. So through that case study of Acme Corp, we've identified that one of the areas where they really want to get better at building their transformation muscle is around business case and prioritization. Remember, they are looking at things right now pretty subjectively. It's kind of like a gut check where, you might lick your finger, stick it in the air, see which way the wind's blowing. And that's common of a lot of organizations. And a lot of organizations that approach Shibumi really want to be more objective in how they're evaluating their initiatives. So they often try to focus on business case and prioritization. So we're going to go through some best practices here that we see and how we can help drive a difference in business case and prioritization. And there's really kind of 4 buckets that we look at when we're prioritizing particular initiatives. The first is around alignment. Often it's just it's a simple yes or no question. Like, does this project, does this initiative align to those 5 objectives at the top of the house, or those 4 objectives that sit, 2 levels beneath the CEO? If yes, great. Pass go, collect $200. If not, like, why are we doing this in the first place, right? So that's probably the first stage gate check when we're prioritizing. Like, does it fit in with alignment of strategic priorities? So let's assume that we move past that into, yes, now we're going to really evaluate these. Oftentimes, the best way to evaluate things, because it's going to hit that financial bucket of outcomes, is, does this initiative or project have financial value? Profitability is the lifeblood of any company. So when we talk about prioritizing initiatives, often financial value is weighted the highest. However, not every project or every initiative can be directly linked to financials or profitability or cash flow or burn. In those cases, that doesn't mean that initiative is not critically important. It could be. But in order for us to evaluate it, we need to kind of diverge from financial value into another mechanism. And one of the ways that we look at that is kind of bifurcating between external benefits and internal benefits. So, like, what are external benefits? Well, what is the impact to stakeholders outside the company, customers, investors, et cetera? Or that initiative might fall into something along the lines of like internal benefits. So, hey, does it impact our employee satisfaction? So those are some of the things that we might evaluate it on. And we'll look at non-financial indicators for those particular buckets, right? What are the critical KPIs that strategic priority might be moving? And we'll assign weights to those categories. This is just one example. Some customers leverage this, and some we kind of co-create a different methodology that looks similar, but it might be in your own nouns, your own verbs, your own nomenclature. But this is kind of like 4 buckets that we look at as absolutely pivotal when we're talking about prioritizing initiatives, prioritizing projects. When we embark on this journey with customers, we want to do, a click down. So before that, we're going to do a poll question. So I want you to think about your organization and how it's prioritizing strategic initiatives right now, critical projects today, and how would you rate the maturity level of that prioritization? So is it elite, where you have clear financial impact and KPI alignment, it's quantifiable and obvious for your strategic initiatives? Is it beneficial how you're doing prioritization right now? Like there's some guardrails in place. It might lead to some tangible benefits and a confidence in prioritizing, but it's not like, it's not like we can stack rank 100 of initiatives with a kind of common framework. Is it in progress? Or you're just building it right now? Or is it subjective, right? Where you're kind of doing that thing where you're just seeing which way the wind is blowing and it's more gut check. Again, no answer is right or wrong here. We work with customers that are, across this broad spectrum. Just curious where the group sits at right now.
Okay, so far we have 80% in progress, building infrastructure for objective evaluation.
Awesome. So looks like we're starting out, but we're trying to get stronger. We're trying to get better. So we'll go through some click downs of those 4 different buckets, and maybe it's helpful. So let's look first. We talked a little bit about alignment. Alignment is like really simple. It's those yes or no questions. Like if you think back to that spider web slide that I showed, that's kind of like your check on alignment, right? Like those 5 categories up top, and then are these things actually aligned to it? Yes or no, move on. Once we move on, let's talk about some critical components for determining financial value. So we'll start with the first thing when we're talking about prioritizing initiatives is just gathering the critical information, right? Like, do we have market research? Do we have competitive analysis for these things? We want to make sure that we have both the quantifiable and non-quantifiable critical information for these. Pretty simple. Let's move on to kind of like the nuts and bolts of determining financial value, which is really cost estimation and revenue and cost savings projections. And this is where we often see the most variability between customers. So we want to make sure that at the end of the day, we have a really, really strong understanding of how these financials are actually calculated, whether it's ROI or MPV or internal rate of return, any one of those metrics. We want to make sure that we have the costs. So we want to make sure that we're estimating both the initial and ongoing costs associated with the initiative. Some organizations, it might just be one single number, and as they get more and more mature, they want to make sure that they're having a distinction between direct costs, which might be technology, labor, materials, or indirect costs, which might be training, overhead, maintenance. So understanding the cost estimation of the project, of the initiative, is absolutely critical in order to understand the net benefits of that strategic priority. So that's kind of like the bottom line of the P&L. What does the top line of the P&L look like? Well, it could be either revenue or cost savings projections. So we want to make sure that we're either forecasting the right revenue. If we're trying to bring products to market faster, what do we think our penetration is going to be? How much is that going to yield? Or if it's cost savings, what does that look like? How do we capitalize those cost savings expenses, et cetera? So that's kind of like just the P&L look, cost estimation, revenue and cost savings projections. And then the last is the payback period. So when do we actually start reaping the rewards of this particular initiative? And how early can we claim those benefits, right? So if it's a cost savings projection that we're really trying to drive here, maybe we start recognizing it in 6 months and we hit our run rate in 12. Or anything in between, or maybe it just starts with a one-time cost savings that we get, in 8 months, right? So those 3 levers will really dictate when we can start actually realizing our benefits. So those are the critical pieces in terms of calculating financials as it relates to prioritizing projects and initiatives. And then there's some kind of like ancillary things too, right? Like risk. We want to make sure that we have that in there. And then some organizations that really have a strong foundation and have been doing this for a while, even kind of like add sensitivity analysis, right? So, they can kind of predict up and down the line, how the benefits will change given certain situations. But oftentimes, really on the right side of the screen is what we're talking about when we're trying to strengthen the muscle on prioritizing our initiatives that we're looking to deploy. For those situations where financials is really difficult, let's talk through, how do we prioritize initiatives to maximize external potential benefits? Sometimes customers want to bucket this into really two different areas: micro, which is more customer centric, and macro, which is more market centric. And then we just need to really figure out, like, what are those critical KPIs that are non-financial? They might influence the finances, but it's actually hard to say, hey, this is our dollar savings or this is our dollar growth from this initiative. So we use critical KPIs as a lever to help us really understand, as a leading indicator, is this going to impact those financial metrics? We'll throw a couple of them out right here. So if we're talking about customer, it might be, CSAT, NPS. Innovation might be new capabilities, added technology. And then if we're looking at macro, what is our competitive advantage against, if we're talking about Acme Corporation, what is it against XYZ Incorporated, right? Like, how does that help us drive a competitive advantage, market share? And then if we get into like social and environmental, it might be, our sustainability ranking, so on and so forth. We've listed out some questions just to like think about here. What are the benefits and risks to the customers? What are the benefits and risks to the brand? Just thought starters when we're trying to figure out what is that KPI library that we want to map our business cases and prioritization to. And then when we think about internal benefits, we can look at this through kind of leading indicators or lagging indicators. Employee retention rate might be a lagging indicator. That is really, really important because it really tells us kind of, the state of how our employees are feeling. But a leading indicator might be something along the lines of like employee engagement surveys. So we want to make sure that we have a good mix of leading and lagging indicators when we're evaluating strategic initiatives that impact, internal benefits, which would be typically employees, right? So not going to drain this slide, but these are typical things that we might think about when we're really kind of trying to design that evaluation process. And then when we're evaluating those initiatives, we want to make sure, again, that we have that alignment. We want to identify those leading and lagging indicators. What some customers really struggle with is like coming up with a baseline. So like, where are we actually at today? We don't know. It lives in, a lot of different, different software solutions or different kind of Excel, PowerPoint. Like, how do we actually figure out what that baseline is? That's critical, right? Because if we want to really become objective, we want to make sure that we have that baseline and we understand what our target is. So we can always be looking back and saying, well, are we doing the right things? If not, that's okay, but let's pivot, right? As long as we have the data to make that decision. And then you launch those initiatives and you actually really measure it. So the outcome of these workshops, by the way, is often, a series of questions or a series of intake forms or building connectivity to where this data lives so that, inside of Shibumi itself, we can look at the 100 initiatives or the 500 initiatives or the 1,000 projects, have the right information, and then be able to stack rank and prioritize. So it's a series of workshops that helps get us there. But yeah, this it's really exciting to help on that journey from quick wins, big wins, and transformational wins. So that concludes the presentation portion of this today. Before I flip it over to Katie, there's obviously no critical next steps here, but I do want to put it out there that, if you saw something today that you think is interesting and we haven't done it with you yet, reach out to me, reach out to my team, and we would be happy to set that up and really start building that journey. That's important. These documents here, we create them for every single customer, or we try to create them for every single customer, and that really serves as our delivery North Star on that journey together. I know we have folks here from all over the globe. That is super, super exciting. So I'm always happy to meet in person. I am based out of New York. I will actually be in the UK next week, meeting with some of you that are on the line here. So I'll be in Norwich, I'll be in London, and then I will be in Manchester. If you are based in the UK and there's an opportunity to meet, I would absolutely love that. With that being said, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate it. For those of you that are customers, we love walking beside you, walking with you on this journey. With that said, Katie, I will flip it over to you.
Yeah, so I won't fully repeat everything Jonathan said, but we hope you all enjoy it. And thank you so much for joining us. And as you head out and you leave us, just don't forget to leave us a rating. Bright Talk is new to us, and love to see some ratings, and we'll have some more content up in the coming days. And if you did miss this webinar, it will be up on our Bright Talk page, so definitely give it a search. And don't forget to register for our next webinar in about a month, hosted by Melody. But have a great day, great afternoon, and evening.
Thank you.